Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I am so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have an amazing guest coming right up. And before we get started, I just want to take a moment and offer my thoughts and prayers to everyone affected by the shooting in Las Vegas. So our first guest today, Jodee Prouse, is here today to talk to us about her new book, The Sun Is Gone. So Jodee's book is a memoir that really talks about addiction and a very complicated family relationship and how she came out the other side. So let's welcome to the show, Jodee.
Thanks for having me. I'm grateful to be here.
It is such a pleasure to have you here. Gosh, when I got my hands on your book and really read it, it's probably one of the most heartbreaking and honest books. Looking at addiction and just the life that people go through with that. What was your overall inspiration? Because I know it's so honest and it has so much that's there that kind of walks people on your path with you. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, first, I think the simple answer is it's love. My brother sadly became addicted to alcohol. And, it's on so many branches of my family tree. So at the very beginning, I thought when he was going through this, I'd never seen anything like it, even though I'd witnessed it with other family members. This was just so completely out of control. I didn't think anyone could believe alcohol could do this. And so I just had this gut instinct that, in 2005, I started taking notes because I thought it was an important story to tell. And I think now, all these years later and after writing it, I think what I realized is, we concentrate a lot on, and we hear about recovery and how many people are in recovery, and I think that is so wonderful, and recovery does work, and people do get well. But I think there's lessons to be learned of what went wrong and why some people don't get well, and maybe some of the things that happen that someone else might read and then make a change in their life. And, I always say we're not going to cure cancer ever if we only concentrate on what works and don't also concentrate on what doesn't. And so that's one of the things I hope people learn from our pages.
Well, and for our listeners that are new to your story, we of course want them to pick up their own copy of The Sun Is Gone. Why don't you share a little bit about your story with us?
Yeah, as everyone thinks, you think you're just a normal, average, everyday family. And until you grow up and all these things happen, you don't realize that not every home has these things going on. I mean, we came from a father that was an alcoholic, and when my brother and I were really young, that's how I start the story, when we're 2 and 6, and, the violent fighting of my parents, and being scared and fearful, and him and I hugging each other in his bed, in my brother's bed, and having to flee the house in the middle of the night, and then it, of course, transitions into, we're teenagers and then young adults with the whole world to look forward to. And sadly, looking back now, my brother started developing some mental health issues, some anxiety and some depression, and he started drinking in high school, and it escalated. And, this is really the progression of alcoholism, but also a lot about family patterns and, the secrets we keep, and we don't talk about it. And when you don't talk about it, no one's really getting help to know what to do to change.
It seems that families that have secrets, sometimes have these patterns as well of addiction, alcoholism, abuse, and it's because no one wants to talk about it. They don't want to, it's like it's a taboo topic. You don't discuss it because it keeps the dynamics, the dysfunctional dynamics going on and safe. They think, well, no one's going to upset our boat and people won't know. And then there's the added shame and all that comes with it.
Yeah, exactly. And then it just continues to the next generation and the next generation. And, no one sat down and said to me as a little girl, Jodee, don't you dare talk about Papa, and don't you, with mental health issues and addiction, don't you dare talk about Daddy, don't you dare ask questions about your uncle. But to stay silent. The messages are given. You are not supposed to talk about this. You hide it at all costs. And yet we live in a society, in a world that says it's a disease. And so if we really believe that, why are we going to such extraordinary lengths to hide these things? And the truth be told, there's members of my immediate family that are not pleased I'm telling this story now. But I'll tell you, I have no shame. It is a disease to me. My brother struggled for many, many years, and he was ashamed of the fact he was an alcoholic. And so you hide. And also, what do? You go out in public, and you just want to fit in. You just want to be like everyone else. And so a lot of times that means you pick up a drink, because you just don't have the confidence to say, hey, listen, I have a drinking problem, and please respect that.
Yeah, it makes it, just that much more difficult, because there is that stigma that comes along with it, even though that science has proven in the case of alcohol that it is a disease. I mean, people have the genetic marker that makes them predisposed to not being able to control their alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk about in my story, and also anyone that has a loved one, or if they're addicted themselves, they will know. It isn't treated like it's a disease. A lot of times when you go to the hospital to seek medical attention, it isn't treated like that, even sometimes by therapists in counseling. It's not treated like that in the media. It isn't treated like that behind our own closed doors in our own family. And I think we need to start there. That's where we can begin, by talking to our young children, especially if it's in our family, of mental illness and addiction. And so these children grow up to really believe it and to be aware.
Well, and the thing is, too, it's, I just applaud you for the courage to not only write your book, but breaking that cycle, because you've definitely done that with your family.
I have, and I haven't had a drink. It was different reasons, but I haven't had a drink in, me and my husband, in more than 25 years. And we wanted, for me, what I took out of childhood was that everything bad came from alcohol. Fighting and yelling and screaming and divorce and infidelity. And those are the messages I took out of there. Now, my brother was only 2, so he obviously got other messages. And so I did want to raise my kids in a sober home, and knowing that my children would grow up and likely drink alcohol, but I just at least wanted them to respect it. But, what ended up happening is I got so obsessed with having to save my brother. I put my own family in harm's way. I was 6 years. I didn't think of anything else other than saving my brother, and, I regret that. I would not make those same choices. Could I go back now? I would have drawn a healthy boundary long before, because I did allow my own sons to witness, I think, things far worse than even what I saw as a child, even though I had a sober home.
Well, and it's interesting, because when we talk about people who, very well-meaning people who are trying to help and trying to move things forward, we end up being enablers and developing this atmosphere of codependency when we don't even realize we're doing that.
Oh, and I'm that person. And to even make it more complex and to show how hard it is, for those 6 years, I was going to meetings with my brother. I was going to some of his therapy. He was showing me everything he was learning when he went off to rehab. I was reading books. I thought I had this. Hey, there's nothing wrong with me, because this is my brother's problem. And you're so right. Until everything falls apart, until 6 years in, I'm at my lowest point, and I can't get out of bed, and I'm losing weight, and I'm not going to work, and I was failing my children and my husband, and my brother was dying. I wasn't saving him. that you do finally realize, oh my gosh, I am as lost as my brother is. I need help. And that's when I broke free from the codependency and the enabling. And it is done out of a place of love. I mean, that heart just pulls you in a certain direction when you believe your loved one's going to die.
Yeah. Well, and I really like how you had your book formatted, because it was done in such a way that, the alcoholism and the different things that were going on, it really set the stage to provide a better understanding of everything that was happening.
Yeah, and thank you. I mean, I wanted to write it in a different way than other memoirs. And, of course, most are written by an addict in recovery, of course, and with just a partial glimpse. I really wanted everyone to hear the whole story. And so you can, from the time we're 2 and 6 years old, all the way up until I'm in my 40s. And I want you to be on the journey with us every step of the way and learning as I'm learning, because that's what it's like. I mean, we don't know what we're doing. This isn't something we're experienced in. And so as we learn, I insert the things from the therapists or the things from rehab or some of the science intertwined in the pages. And hopefully if anybody sees themselves, knows that you do have to make some changes, and that everybody really does, I think, play a part in, first of all, keeping it going, but also perhaps getting your loved one help.
I can only imagine how confusing it was as a child growing up in a home that had addictions and different things, mental illness and what have you going on, because it must have seemed very confusing growing up. And then you would expect that that's kind of like the norm, that this is how things are.
Yeah, some people will say to me, well, you saw it your whole life, so didn't your brother know better? And that's so true what you just said. No, these things sometimes become our lessons of right, not our lessons of wrong. That you're supposed to, drink every day, and you're supposed to drive motorsports, and when you fish and you hunt and you camp and you snowmobile, that you're drinking and driving, and just some of these lessons that we're shown. And, of course, we're all individuals. We're all born in a different order. I did take different lessons out of childhood, and I was older. I think what really, for me, the biggest struggle I had for a long time was that I didn't know our childhood played any part in my brother's alcoholism, and I didn't know really as severe as how the mental illness would tie in. And, of course, we know that now in 2017. And he was 2 years old, so I just figured, hey, he didn't remember. And so I never talked to him about any of those early years. And so for me, that's regret. And I always say regret is not guilt. Regret is just, I wish I had talked to my brother more and told, maybe that would have helped him understand where some of these underlying issues that he was feeling were coming from.
Yeah, because it can be, it's just really interesting when you look back, when, I know there's been lots of studies that talk about children who are born into addictive or mental illness type of families, just the struggles that they go through as they're growing up. And it's quite profound, but, it's interesting. Not a whole lot of people are talking about that. They're not making the correlation. They're just thinking, that person's a bad apple, or has a problem, without really realizing that there's more going on there.
Oh, absolutely. And science now does prove that, childhood trauma and or sexual abuse can lead to anxiety and depression or more severe mental health issues and alcohol and drug addiction later in life. Well, if we know this, then if we can just rewind and start talking about maybe there's some things that happened and our loved one will get help. But I think where the disconnect is, people are scared to talk about those stories. I mean, even myself, how dare I say these things about my parents, or we're made to feel ashamed. I don't blame my parents, but some of these things did happen. And, you know, if our parents will just put our arms around us and say, listen, I know maybe this impacted you, and I'm sorry, and we're going to work through this. Oh, what a great, beautiful gift it would be to a lot of people that really need to hear those words.
Well, what I find interesting is that, you know, usually the parents are stuck in that cycle, and they're only teaching what they have learned so well. You know, so it's something that's kind of been ingrained from them, you know, into them from a very young age. So being able to get to a place where they can even acknowledge it would be a huge leap. It'd feel like they're jumping over a chasm in order to see that and kind of realize things, because it does come with a lot of guilt and shame if they're not getting treatment and getting help to understand what's going on.
Absolutely. If they're stuck in their own mental health issues or addiction and problems, and I agree. And for me, that is why I had to break free from my family. And, you know, sadly, my brother did lose his battle with alcohol addiction in March of 2012.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. And, you know, I think he would have had to find the strength to also break free from some of those unhealthy, dynamics that were going on in our family, if he was ever truly going to get well. And that is so hard. That just adds a whole other complexity to something that is already very difficult, which is, you know, getting sober from drug or alcohol addiction.
Yeah, and what's interesting when people talk about, and I know that you've also mentioned this too, but when people talk about, you know, disconnecting from family, it almost seems like it's a taboo thing. People don't do that. It's okay if you disconnect with friends and coworkers who might be toxic and not willing to look at their behavior and get help. But when it's family members, sometimes there's a stigma that's around that as well, going, gosh, you know, what's really wrong here? It seems it's a little displaced, because I mean, I think setting boundaries is setting boundaries regardless who it is.
Yes, and you're made to feel. I mean, I'm that girl, right? I love my parents. We are estranged to this day. I wish them nothing but health and happiness in this life. I'm sorry for their loss. But for my own recovery and my own health, I've had to separate from there. But you're made to feel like I have done something wrong. And you're right, people get divorced, and, you know, nobody would expect that you can live through these things for your entire life, and your friends would encourage you and rally behind you to get a divorce or quit your job or end a friendship. But you're right, when they are family members, it is like something you are made to feel guilty for if you decide to do. And no one can make those decisions for you. And it is extremely painful. They are the people we love most in this whole world.
Well, I know you were very, you know, from your story and what I've seen and heard, that you were very close to your brother, and that was, it'd be just, for anyone, just a very difficult time, you know, being there and helping to pick up the pieces and then trying to rebuild your own life after coming to a certain point where you're like, oh gosh, you know, this is like, they call this enabling. I gotta work on, you know, what I'm doing with my family.
Yeah. Yeah. And most people thankfully never have to make that choice where you have to choose between one family member or another. You know, I was drowning. But at the end of the day, I did draw a healthy boundary. I think I drew it far too late. And I should have said no to my brother a long time ago and made him responsible for his own life. And I think other family members should have done that as well. I think that's a gift. That is not something that you should feel guilty about, or that you've deserted them or abandoned them. It sometimes is the greatest, most compassionate gift you can give them. I know that now. I'm not responsible for anyone's life other than my own. And, that includes my own sons. And, it's painful when you're just up against a wall and you finally realize that.
And I think it would be a lesson for just about anybody, because there is this sense of responsibility and, gosh, what can I do and how can we help? And so it makes it so that it's, I think a journey that if anyone was put on, they would feel the same way.
Oh, yeah, and not just addiction. And that's why I say, my story is about alcoholism, but it can be so many other things, right? Like nurturing a parent that's getting older, or a loved one passing away from cancer, or with Alzheimer's. I mean, we do want to look after others, and especially as women. And we feel like failures when we can't, or if it gets to be too much. So I hope our pages do give other people strength. And, I'm in a much, much healthier and a better place now. And that doesn't mean I don't still live with loss and grief and all those things, but I've chose to take our story and turn it around to help others. And it really does fill that hole that's been left in my heart.
Well, I applaud you because, your book is so honest. And I think anyone that's going through, dealing with a loved one who is an alcoholic or has mental illness, or maybe both, or whatever the case is, they can pick it up and feel like, gosh, there's a light at the end of the tunnel with all of this.
Yeah, even though he didn't make it. And so I thank you for saying that, because you do always have hope. Always. Never lose hope. And you can always make the changes to turn it around. And I thought at the time no one could understand what this is like. I just felt so completely alone. And I know now that's not true. It's just that no one talks about it. As I meet people now and they say, hey, what do you do? And I say, I write a book. All I need to do is say it's about addiction. And 9 times out of 10, that person will just start and telling me some of their experiences. You just automatically know. Someone knows how you feel. This person isn't going to judge me. I'm safe to tell my story. And the more we have conversations like this, the more people will feel safe to be able to speak up and get help.
And that's kind of what this is really all about. I think you really honor your brother with your book. Even though he did succumb to alcoholism, you really do honor him with your book, because it's bigger now. It has a bigger message. It's to help other people kind of see that, hey, there are possibilities here, and it doesn't have to look like it's like how you're saying, it's hopeless. They can have hope about it.
Yes, absolutely. Why do some people go to rehab once and some people go 6, 7, 10 times? We don't know the answers to that, but we also don't know the answers to, why some people can drink occasionally and why some become so completely addicted by it. But that's one of those lessons, I think, in my story is never, ever did I think this could ever happen to my brother. And, it can happen to anyone. And especially when, alcohol is legal and you see it on TV and it seems so innocent. And, we kiss our children as they're going to go off to college and university, and they'll almost all try alcohol. And so I just think people need to be more aware, have their eyes a little bit more wide open, and also, like I said, have the dialogue from an early age.
Yeah, it allows them to at least have a better understanding of some of the dangers that alcohol does pose. You know, it's really interesting. I've seen people who have gone from social drinking to, you know, something happens in their life that's tragic and it tips over and it becomes everyday drinking, you know, and to the point where it's not, you know, they're just waiting to get their next drink, just like an addict would, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, starting very innocently. I mean, I talk about it at the end of our book because I didn't understand all of that, you know, in 2006, that my brother had night terrors from the time he was very young and sleptwalked and then experienced, you know, some depression in high school. But if we had known that some of these things from our childhood trauma would then perhaps lead to addiction or a problem with drinking, he could have got help for that at such a young age. But I'm the first to say that was the 70s, and it probably wasn't a reasonable expectation then. But it is today. It is today. And so if there's things going on in your child's life that might disrupt them, or even something as simple as a divorce, just get your children help to talk to someone just to make sure they're transitioning all right.
Yeah, I mean, they were still trying to figure out seatbelts back then.
Yeah, and it was healthy. I always say, and it was healthy to smoke. So yeah, you're right. And
they had half a plane where you had smoking section, another half that wasn't, which made absolutely no sense.
And but, so I acknowledge that. Like, it was 2000 until 2012 with my brother. But even now, we know so much more. But I'll tell you, if I had known then that childhood trauma had anything to do with this story, I would have been just jumping from the rooftops, screaming as loud as I could. Listen, these things that happened in our childhood impacted us because I remember. I remember what I felt like. I remember that scared, fearful, hysterical, crying little 2-year-old boy. And, things perhaps could be different for us now. But it would have taken somebody to speak up.
When, you were with your brother and he was at that point where it was just getting so bad, at what point did you decide, gosh, I need to kind of refocus and take a step and maybe start focusing on me? At what point was it so bad that, things had to change?
Oh, I was failing in every level, failing him. And when I say this, it's what I felt. I know it's not true. Felt failing my husband, my children, my job, my own health. My brother was dying anyway, and yet I was doing all these things. But what really changed is I went to therapy and I don't want to know what he needs. I need to know what I need, because I am at my lowest point of my whole life. And, I still remember the therapist saying, you're not responsible for their lives. And he meant, my mom and my sister and my brother. And, I had stayed true to that for almost 40 years. And so I started getting help for myself. And, I just really believed nothing and no one was changing in this story. Everyone was staying exactly the same. Everybody, all of our family, me, my brother. And so, of course, everything just continued. I see that so clearly now. And so I thought, no, I'm going to change. I'm going to listen to the advice of the professionals. Regardless if my heart is telling me, you can't do those, I'm going to listen. And I did. And that's when I finally started healing and continue to do those things even now to be in a good, healthy place. But I think ultimately our addicted loved one has to make that decision at some point to really change. Change is not easy.
No, it's not. And for a lot of people, it's a very scary thing, even if they're in a state of addiction where it is god-awful. To them, there's some familiarity with that, and it allows them to check out. So it doesn't seem as bad as the horrible option of possibly changing where there's this huge unknown.
Absolutely. And, in my brother's case, I mean, the worst case of addiction I had ever seen. And, to him when he sobered up, it's not that bad. But also he had, surrounded himself with people that I think encouraged that thought process, and was very, very much in denial, I think, until the very end. Denial isn't some made-up word, we throw around to use as an excuse. It's very real. My brother's truth in his mind is the same as the truth that I have in mine. He just didn't see it was as bad as it was, and extremely sad.
Yeah. How was your husband during all of this? I mean, because I can just imagine how difficult it would have been to be taking care of children and the household, and then you've got your brother that you're taking care of. How did the family manage through all of this?
I think the reason why I was able to step back and not put any effort at times into my own family is because I did have a husband that just loves me so much. And that was the excuse I made in my mind. He'll look after, the children. And I see now it was very, very unfair to him. Luckily, our marriage was rock solid enough that it survived this. But I'll tell you the important story at the end. When I had finished writing my book, this was about 2 years after my brother passed away, and I'd said to him, and I meant it as such a compliment to my husband, I would have understood now if you had just said, we can't have him brought around, you can't see him anymore, Jodee, he's hurting you, and I did. I'd learned so much, and I meant that as a compliment, and my husband said to me, I never said those things to you because if I had made you choose back then, you wouldn't have chose me. And I think it's just such an important thing, and many will understand what that means because that's how lost I was in my childhood and my feeling of love and responsibility for my brother. I would have left my own husband and children if I was forced back then to have to make that choice before I was ready.
Well, and it says so much. I know in your book you talk a little bit about there was some challenges that you and your husband went through, and it just how hard that was for you to put that in your book as well to some degree. But when you made the decision to do that, I really liked how you framed all of it.
Oh,
because it's a tough topic.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, without giving it away, because I allude to it at the very beginning in chapter 3, my husband and I had a domestic violence incident after 5 years of marriage, and it involved a 911 call, and it is a secret that I kept for over 20 years. We didn't even tell our now adult sons that this had happened, and I always knew it was going to go in the book because my husband, and as hard as it is, and I hope I have framed it in that people can understand, I thought he was the hero, that he was the lesson, that he is what people aspire to do and be, that you can make a mistake in this life and change, that we have regrets and that we have shame, and that, he still will cry 25 years later if you mention it, but that you can change your whole life. And so that's why it was always going in the book, and I talk about it in depth at the end, and then of course we had to sit down, and at the time I think our sons were 21 and 23, and when we finally told them.
Yeah, and had to talk with them about that.
Yeah.
And your husband, for a lot of people they're going to say, well, gosh, having something like that happen, you just get out. But there's more to that story, and I encourage everyone to pick up their own copy of The Sun Is Gone to read about it, because it does explain more of the human side of what people go through. And it's not to say that every person that has a domestic violent situation at home would be someone to do this with, but it allows you to read, to see the whole picture from your point of view and have a clear understanding of what happened and how that was fixed, and nothing like that's ever happened again.
Yes, and nothing like that ever happened before. I mean, it was one time. It wasn't a pattern. It wasn't multiple times. It wasn't. It was one time, and I did do the right thing. I phoned the police. I filed for divorce. I was separated, but it ended up a beautiful, beautiful story for me. I have been happily married for 27 years, and we are madly in love to this day. And the people that our best friends, some of our best friends, anyone that's known us for 20 years had no idea. And it's not who we are. Your mistakes don't define who you are. And, I'll say our youngest son, after my husband sat and really believed our sons would never speak to him again, our youngest son said, "Thank you, Dad, for telling us this when we're adults." And he said, "It's not as if it happened yesterday."
They've been able to see just the family throughout. I mean, you've done so much to, you've done the right thing. You've broken the chains of addiction, so that it's not something that your children will be involved in. Everyone makes their own choices, but you've really put them in a place where they've got a very clear understanding of, just kind of when something happens, there's consequences for that, and that's not normal. And so I applaud you for breaking those, just that cycle.
And thank you, because that, we tried really hard, and I do at times. You think so many things that I let the children see, but what I know now, and you're so correct, even when it comes to our children, I've given them the proper tools. I've given them the information. I've given them what has happened in our family, what has happened, in our own, my husband and I's own marriage. But what I really do know now is what my children choose to do with those lessons. It is on them. And children and adults need consequences. And that's sometimes a very painful road and a hard one. But everyone needs consequences.
Well, and it allows them to see that, it just gives them a clear understanding of what that kind of world is. Because I know a lot of times when people go away to college, they tend to drink in excess or use recreational drugs or what have you. And so what ends up happening, they have no understanding about that life at all and what that could mean for them. But, and it's an interesting, I think it's a discussion that needs to happen more often in regards to just what's alcoholism? What does that look like? Mental illness and drug abuse. What do these things look like, and what will that mean for you down the road?
Absolutely. And that's why, it's far too late to start talking to our children when they're teens. You start talking to them when they're young and really have them make a difference. My little niece, she is in grade 6. And when she graduated last year, at the end of the school year, they were to do a oral report on anything they wanted. And she chose alcoholism. And I just thought, I was so proud, because I've always talked to her openly and honestly about her Uncle Brett. And I just thought, I hope that teacher knows how brave that little girl is, because that's who's going to change the world, is these children. These children are gonna make a difference, and so it's a beautiful gift to start talking to them earlier. I mean, my brother in high school, he doesn't know to start saying, hey, I think I'm suffering from depression, or I think I'm having a bit of anxiety. You don't even know what those things are. You don't know what they feel like. You don't know what they look like. We don't talk about them. And so what happens a lot of times, you have a couple drinks, and that goes away, doesn't it? For a while.
Yeah, it will be a mask for a little bit, and then it becomes, you're teaching yourself that's a way of coping when now we have so many great tools that can be used instead of, turning to something like that. Maybe it's going to work out, to release your frustrations, or, talking with a therapist.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for me, on the opposite end of the scale, just was so scared always of somehow, what if I have that gene that I would become addicted, and so just stayed so far clear of it. But I do to this day have to do all the things you just said. Read books and talk and read articles and write articles. Do things for a healthy way of moving past those feelings.
And what's interesting, in the 70s, there wasn't that much about it. I mean, I believe what they had was like Alcoholics Anonymous and not a whole lot more from that. People are still trying to understand, because it's coming right off the cusp of the 60s and quite a few of the hippie generation that were using drugs to, obtain other, levels of consciousness or what have you.
Oh, absolutely. I touch on that early on in my story when I talk about my Uncle Ed, who for decades never left the confines of his trailer. And my grandmother paid his bills, and when she passed away, she made my aunts and uncles and Dad promise to continue doing that. And just watching someone deteriorate year after year after year, slowly, of alcoholism. And that stuck with me, too, from being a little girl and watching that. But I do have so much appreciation and respect now for my aunts and uncles and my dad. They didn't know any better. But what do we say to ourselves now? Because we know better now. But sometimes those hard things isn't what your heart wants you to do, but you have to find the strength. And
I would agree with you. Like, the discussion's really changed, in regards to what people are talking about in regard to alcohol. It still needs to change some more, because, you were talking about how even the nurses, and just different medical professionals would, there's this stigma when they deal with people who are alcoholics. It's kind of like get over it or get sober, or whatever the case may be.
Oh, absolutely. In the hospital, or I watch TV and Kimmel and Fallon make fun of, Toronto Mayor Rob Ford when he was unraveling due to an addiction. And, I remember watching that, and the audience is laughing, and I'm thinking, what about his family? Or would that be okay if they were making fun of Alzheimer's? I mean, why is this allowed? But that's why, talking to our children, they'll grow up. They will be better doctors and nurses and psychologists and psychiatrists and, all those things, because they won't have that same stigma. What if they grow up and they all really believe it's a disease? What a difference that'll make in the world.
Yeah, we definitely need more people like that, right?
We do.
Because it's such a heavy topic, and there's especially nowadays with all the different things that people are coming in contact with in the drug realm. The alcohol portion of it is also just heartbreaking. And then we talk about mental illness, and people just aren't really having a discussion in regards to that. It's like, what do you do with your mentally ill populace that maybe, have what they call, I think, dual diagnoses, where they're also, an alcoholic or a drug addict.
Yeah, and I think that was the big piece that was missing with, I know that was a huge part of the puzzle piece that was missed with my brother. It was always, get help through the drinking, you have to stop drinking, instead of, 6 or 7 rehab stays, always just about alcohol. And knowing now, wow, what a difference it could have made if he had went to a dual diagnosis center where they concentrated on mental illness and addiction. But I'm always the first to say, none of that knowledge would have mattered if my brother wasn't willing to sort through his pain, the truth, and change.
Yeah, because it really is. For anyone that's going through, any type of addiction, they do have to reach a point where they want something better out of life.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of it goes back into what they tell themselves and their real desire to want a better life, but also coming back to the same patterns. We're told and they're told to find sober friends and positive support systems, and it just adds to the complexity when you come back and some of these support systems that aren't healthy are your family. And I think, that goes back to some of the relationships that you need to find the strength to break free from.
And and what courage you have to talk about that, because, if family members aren't willing to get help, we would treat that relationship like any relationship, that we would be around. If it's a toxic relationship, we really have to take a hard look at it.
Yeah. Yes. And you can come out. I'm here to say, I was at the lowest point of my life. When I was 39. I'm 48 years old now, and so much happier, healthier. Of course, I wish my brother was here to share this story with me.
Yeah.
But he's not. But I have learned some wonderful positive lessons, and I think my life is better because of it. And, I thank him for that. This whole story taught me a lot. When I started writing, I say that in my book too, I thought I was writing his story. And you get to the end, and 2 years later, and it's just like, this isn't his story after all. It's mine.
Yeah.
And so that's a gift from him, definitely.
I don't think that there's one person that can't think of an individual that's having, it could be an uncle, an aunt, a cousin, but there's somebody that knows somebody that's going through these type of situations. No one's that removed from it, because we're going through these epidemics at this point in history of addiction. Yeah.
Never has it been worse. And with all the knowledge, it should be getting better. And so some approaches have to change, and that's why I hope my story just shows some of the things that do go wrong. But if there's one thing I could say is, if you think, even on a small scale, if you think someone maybe has a problem or is in trouble, speak up. I think we don't say anything because we're meant to feel like we're saying something wrong, that we're saying something negative. How dare you say this? No, I'm saying it because I love you and I care and I'm worried.
That's a pretty powerful statement. And even though it may be a very uncomfortable conversation, I would encourage people, just as you've said, to not be afraid to have it.
No, because if that person, whether it's a friend or a neighbor or somebody you work with, or if it's your child or someone else in your family, if you find out, months or years from now they passed away, you'll always wonder and say, I wish I had just said something. It's not up to them to fix them and to save them and to run their life, but just tell them that you're there and that you care and that do they need help. 1 in 10 people in the U.S. go for help for fear of being stigmatized and judged. That's 90% of people that don't get help because they're scared. And if they know there's a safe person to talk to, what a difference. And you could be that person.
Yeah, that person that makes a major impact in somebody's life just by having the courage to have a discussion.
Yeah, I think conversation changes lives, and yeah, it's.
I would agree with you.
Yes, I know. It does.
Yeah. Well, and so looking back on all of this, because it's been a little while now, and your book is out there, and it's doing so well. It's getting such great accolades. What do you want people to take away from reading your book? What kind of overall message do you want them to really glean from your book?
I hope they learn to accept, learn, heal, and forgive. I'm going to, at the end of my book, I am estranged, from my parents to this day. And 8 years I haven't had a relationship. I have a younger sister. And I wrote this book for other families. But I gave a copy of this book to my sister. And what I wasn't expecting is the change it would bring to my own life, because she read that book. And we have now, I think we're going on 5 months into a reconciliation. And she said, Jodee, I never saw life through your eyes. And so it is about healing and forgiving and accepting and learning. And, I just wasn't ever expecting that would mean for me.
It's interesting when we talk about forgiveness, a lot of the times when people look at maybe a parent who has really hurt us, maybe that was the best that they knew how as far as parents, which would probably be pretty sad. But let's say that they hurt us, and coming to a place where you can forgive them, that is such an important piece. And I'm so, it's so heart-touching that you bring that up, because walking around with, it's that old saying, kind of like walking around with resentment and anger is kind of drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It doesn't work,
Oh, and I don't end my book that way. When I finish writing my book, I of course 8 years estranged from my sister, and you're right, holding on to all that anger and the blame, and that will just keep you stuck where you are. And the biggest thing though with forgiveness is it takes people to say, I'm sorry. Those 2 simple words can be so freeing to somebody else.
Now, what would you suggest? Let's say someone's estranged from a family member who isn't willing to get help or do anything, but they want to find that forgiveness in their heart for them, regardless what happened. What would you suggest for them?
I just think talking and sharing your story and helping other people is a way of letting that go. I am still estranged from my parents, and it isn't that I'm holding on to any of those unhealthy emotions. It's just healthier for me that I don't have them in my life. But I think telling other people these stories and letting other people also know that they're not alone, I think that's healing. Because sometimes we don't get the I'm sorry that we need. And we have to accept that and still move on in a healthy way.
Well, and a lot of times the people we're expecting that I'm sorry from might not even be capable of giving it to us, even if they're still here.
And, I think that's very much the truth in my story. And I understand that. It makes me sad. I wish things were different. But I don't think my parents are capable of that. And so I accept that.
It's really interesting because that kind of ties back into that you're not responsible for somebody else. You don't have to be responsible for them saying, I'm sorry. It's just about how we do our journey, how we show up, and how, overall, when we get to a place of forgiveness, it's about us, even though it's about them, it's really about us.
Oh, absolutely. Because if you keep wanting something that you can't ever have, you'll just stay in that same place forever. Mm-hmm. And you have to find a way to let it go and to move forward. And, we don't all get what we want out of this world. It can be extremely beautiful, but it can be extremely challenging and painful at the same time. And, I have just learned to let go of all those negative feelings and just to turn it into a positive.
Mm. Well, Jodee, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to leave, our listeners with in regards to just your journey in general? It doesn't necessarily have to be about the book.
Oh, just that it's never too late to change your life if something's going on and you're not happy or you feel that you're struggling. And you should never, ever be ashamed to ask for help. I think a lot of times that's our sticking point. We don't ask for help. And, that help changed my whole life when I showed up in therapy when I was 39. And never be ashamed to need help.
Well, I think this would probably be an appropriate time to I'm going to share real quick the Alcoholics Anonymous website. So if there's somebody there that feels like they need help, there's a place that they can reach out to and find a local meeting in your area to go to, which is aa.org. And then, Jodee, where can people connect with you and be part of your community?
Oh, I would love to hear from people, even if they just want to share their story. My website is jodeeprouse.com, so it's JODEEPROUSE, and so you can send me an email, you can get the book, or the book is also available on Amazon.com.
And they can connect with you on social media. We're connected, and of course, be part of your community and go out and buy The Sun Is Gone. Jodee, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you very much. Again, it goes back. Conversation changes lives, and I'm very thankful to have been a part of the day.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to tune in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.